Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's about public trust and shared responsibility, a feeling of we are all in this together rather than us and them. That's the reaction to the Dominic Cummings furore by families across the country who've had to deal with the most traumatic situations, the illness of a child, the death of a parent, as we heard earlier in the programme, yet didn't breach any of the lockdown rules. Fatima Manji has been hearing from some of them.
As streets emptied out of people, all of us felt the eeriness and unease of lockdown. For many, though, it was much more painful, sitting at home unable to be with loved ones as they died. Miranda's mother passed away in a care home.
And as a grieving family, what do you feel about this whole affair?
Well, I think it's just insulting, really. I mean, I think if he'd been able to come out and say, yeah, I made a mistake and I'm really sorry for that, and I want to keep working for the government because I think I do a good job, blah blah, then that might have been something. But he's basically just said it's not a problem what I've done.
Dominic Cummings has insisted he was trying to protect his family. That's angered many others with children. Wendy was alone at home with her two while displaying COVID symptoms.
My 13-year-old developed the symptoms on the day that the tragic story broke about the 13-year-old dying. So I was just obviously very worried about what might happen to my child, and also what might happen to both my children if my situation deteriorated and I had to go into hospital.
He says he was trying to protect his child. Do you have any sympathy for that?
I mean, we're supposed to be all in this together. He would know as a parent how worrying these things are. I'm not discounting that. I was feeling that as well. I can't understand any reason actually why his circumstances would count as exceptional.
Annie's husband contracted COVID while in hospital for an operation. She and her daughter were isolating at home and unable to be with him in his final moments.
I'm really angry at people like us who did what we could. We did the right thing, and there he is bending the rules, playing with the rules, and one rule for him and another one for the rest of us. And my anger also is that his behaviour may encourage other people to not take this seriously. And having been up close to this disease, it's not funny.
So much suffering, so many sacrifices. Now a sense of fear that this man's actions could mean people won't follow the rules as they should.
Well, I'm now joined by Tim Montgomery, a Conservative activist who has said he's embarrassed to have ever backed Boris Johnson for high office following the Prime Minister's support for Dominic Cummings, and Alistair Campbell, who served as Director of Communications for Prime Minister Tony Blair. We have contacted many people who expressed support for Dominic Cummings in the last few days, but none of them wanted to come on the programme tonight. Tim Montgomery first, what are the consequences of Dominic Cummings remaining in post in your view?
I think the danger for the Conservative Party, Cathy, is that the message upon which the party was elected last December, and which I had such high hopes for as a supporter of Boris and the Conservative Party, the idea that this was a different Conservative Party that was going to govern for all those red wall seats that gave Boris Johnson his majority, that's in danger, because just one of the clips that you just played, the lady that said we're all in this together, that's an incredibly important sense of solidarity for a government to possess, particularly during a pandemic when the authority of government messaging is so important. And this affair is putting that at risk.
Alistair Campbell, do you agree with that?
I do, and I think that the country would be more forgiving, possibly, of Dominic Cummings, even though he's clearly broken the guidelines, and he's, I think, lied at several points. And if he hasn't, the Prime Minister has, because their stories don't add up, and his wife's story doesn't add up. All these inconsistencies.
All of which they deny, by the way.
Well, they can't, because, you know, I know you have to do that, Cathy, but they can't. But I think the worst thing is that, so they'd have that, the public would have that sympathy if they felt the government was on top of the crisis. But we now have had as many deaths as I think we're getting close to 40 other European countries. We are now right up in the top of the infection and deaths league table in the world. Boris Johnson, He failed in phase one because of his indifference and because of his incompetence. And actually, I think they're now driving the easing of the lockdown, not according to the science, but according to try and get Dominic Cummings out of the news. Well, there's one way you can get Dominic Cummings out of the news a little bit, and that's to do the right thing.
Well, Tim Montgomery, why do you think Boris Johnson appears to be fearful of sacking him?
I think it's true that the two of them were at the heart of the Brexit referendum together. You know, we did not expect, as Brexit supporters like myself, to win that referendum. There was something very special in that campaign that Boris Johnson was obviously impressed with. And then, if you remember, a year ago, the Tory party was in some opinion polls in single digits ahead of the European elections. The fact that the Conservatives came back and won the December election was partly because of the genius of Dominic Cummings. I think he is a genius in lots of political ways. He just shouldn't be in charge. And unfortunately, what Boris Johnson has allowed to happen is for his Downing Street machine to be dominated by one person and surrounded himself with yes men. And in a crisis of the kind that we're experiencing at the moment, you need a diverse range of differing views. You need all of your talents. And at the moment, whether it's in the Downing Street machine or in cabinet, Boris Johnson does not have the best people alongside him.
So would the government collapse without him, Tim Montgomery?
No, of course not. You know, there's someone like Isaac Levido in Downing Street now, a brilliant man who has masterminded the campaigns down under and here. He's a brilliant political strategist. There are plenty of talents in the Conservative Party that could serve Boris Johnson with integrity and with effectiveness. And there are people like Jeremy Hunt, Sajid Javid, I would say Theresa May, who should be in the cabinet at the moment at a time of national crisis. And the fact is there are too many inexperienced ministers at the top table when the challenges demand that you have your best people in your top team.
Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair faced repeated calls to sack you in the controversy over the Iraq dossier, and he resisted it. Isn't Boris Johnson entitled to resist getting rid of his top aide?
I don't agree with any comparison there at all, because I never ever would have put Tony Blair in the position that Dominic Cummings has with Boris Johnson. I would never ever do anything in defiance of the law or of government policy. There were lots of things happened within my time in working with Tony Blair that I wasn't 100% on board for, but my job was to work for the Prime Minister. I think what you have in this extraordinary relationship is Boris Johnson, who I've known for a very long time, intellectually lazy, very vain, loves to be liked, doesn't work very hard, and Dominic Cummings, who does have his own agenda. I never had my own agenda. I wanted Labour to win. I wanted Labour to be a good government. That was it. The politicians then did the job. And if you have, I thought the optics yesterday of an unelected advisor, which I was, yes, I had a very high profile, but I didn't go around looking for it. I was given it, if you like, by the way that I was treated by the press. I'm not complaining about that. It went with the territory. Dominic Cummings giving a press conference in the garden at number 10, and then the Prime Minister goes on after and says, well, I don't need to deal with that because Dominic's dealt with that. I mean, if they got any idea, Kathy, I've been doing interviews today with people all over the world. This story is being covered all around the world. And we are a laughingstock. We are a joke in the world. And as I say, it wouldn't be that serious if it wasn't that we're also one of the worst performing countries in dealing with the crisis.
Tim Montgomery?
Well, I think that point that Alistair, I hate agreeing with Alistair Campbell. It'll do my credibility no good at all. But the problem is that governments can cope with dislike, they can cope with disdain. But when you become a laughingstock, and that's what this government is in danger of becoming at the moment, it's very hard to recover from that. And that's why someone who so wants the Brexit project, so wants this government to succeed, the longer this crisis drags out, and it clearly is a crisis, the more those things that I believe in are endangered. And I just wish he would resign for the sake of his Prime Minister and for the sake of the Conservative government.
Very briefly, Tim Montgomery, Dominic Cummings blamed the media for stoking public anger against him. Is this a media bubble story that will just fizzle out? Very briefly.
Not at all. Every Tory MP I've spoken to in the last few days, their postbag is enormous. This is an issue that's absolutely cut through with the people.
Tim Montgomery, Alistair Campbell, thanks very much for joining us. John.
And we can get an update now from our reporter Jane Dodge in Durham. Jane.
A senior police source has told me this evening that Durham Constabulary is investigating the trip taken by Dominic Cummings to Durham at the end of March, early April, and his movements while he was here. If you remember, the Crime and Police Commissioner of Durham, Steve White, told the programme last night that he'd written to the Chief Constable, Jo Farrell, asking her to clarify the facts. There was confusion about the contacts between the police and the Cummings family when Dominic Cummings was here. It had been suggested originally by the police that the family had been told he might have breached lockdown rules. Downing Street said that never happened. Then Downing Street said, in fact, a conversation had taken place, but it had been Mr. Cummings Sr. who had phoned the police to discuss security. Well, a senior source, as I have said, has told me that this investigation has now started. I also spoke to Robin Lees. He was the man who saw Dominic Cummings, his wife and child, in Barnard Castle on Easter Sunday. He said the police called at his home yesterday, last night. Two of them took a statement from him. We also understand other people who claim they also saw him have also been interviewed by the police. We don't know what the parameters of that investigation will be at this stage, or whether Dominic Cummings will be interviewed in person by the police.